IronMace, is that the company that's the dev, yeah, of Dark and Darker? Is that what's name of the dev company? It's Lonk? Just say Long, bro. Why is there a K at the end? Long.
Choi and Terrence were working at P3. Choi, in violation of not only his employment agreement, company policies, and express instruction, transferred 11,602 P3 files from Nexon to his own private servers. They alleged that the defendants' access to these files and other trade secrets gave defendants a significant commercial advantage once Choi and Park left Nexon to form IronMace. Now, this is not disputed. By the way, this is not an allegation that is disputed. In IronMace's very own testimony, where they came out to defend the DMCA, which of course you're only going to do publicly because it benefits you to do so, they even said themselves, yes, we had these servers. They even say, Nexon told us to stop using these servers at a certain point, but we continued anyway. So having access to these files and having access to files they shouldn't have had access to is not in dispute. This is a statement of fact. The dispute is what did they do with those files, and we're going to go through something here that will,
well, isn't the quality and the contents of the files also pretty important? Because it could be pretty important, or it could be kind of whatever. Like, it could be slightly altered, like that fucko said. Like Unreal edited shit or something, right? Unreal Engine resources.
Will completely dispel any illusion that there wasn't foul play here. Whether or not it's legally actionable, I cannot say, because again, I'm not a lawyer. In terms of these two things they're alleging, the misappropriation of trade secrets and the copyright infringement, I can't say from a legal basis whether that's true or not, but I can say from a basis of common sense that there is no way you can explain this away if Nexon are in possession of what they're saying they are. So again, this entire section is just going through, you know, what they allege that they've done. Nexon made game, people stole files, was fired for doing so, other people were convinced to leave and form this studio and make a game that is, and I'll quote them, substantially similar to P3. And of course, substantially similar essentially means it's the same thing. And then it goes through what Nexon does to protect its trade secrets. Now, why does it do this? Because obviously if you don't take measures to protect your trade secrets, it means they're not really trade secrets, are they? Therefore, you can't argue somebody stole your trade secrets because you didn't do anything to protect them in the first place from being stolen. So they of course go through the guidelines. So it explains Nexon is a video game company, so therefore video games and the development of video games are Nexon's most valuable asset. And it takes great care to protect them, including the confidential data and intellectual property developed by its employees using company resources to create them. This is a common sense point. I've seen a whole bunch of people making this point that you're an employee of a company and you should be allowed to leave a company and then just make a game that is substantially identical, essentially, to what you were working on before. I don't think that makes sense in moral, legal, or really any kind of common sense perspective, because at that point,
it could if you don't have a,
you're just allowed to copy.
You don't have an NDA, right?
Does. The world couldn't work that way. You couldn't go and work for a company, have them pay a whole bunch of people to make something, and then just leave and make the exact same thing. And I'm not talking about copyrighting genre ideas, because people keep getting this twisted. I don't understand what words I'm using that people then hear and go with the, you can't copyright a genre. Nobody is ever at any point saying that you can. Nexon's not said it, I've not said it, nobody interacting with the facts on this case have said that.
I mean, if you're going to make an MMORPG, there's going to be overlap for sure.
Things that make an
or
idea
a fantasy game,
itself.
right?
So basically what they're saying here is when you employ people,
We're
which
gonna
is
have to-
common sense, you give them guidelines as an employee. What can
You're gonna have to
do,
argue
what
that
you
it's
do,
more
what we're
different
paying you
than
for, what your job is.
just a different
As
game
you
in
can
the same
see,
genre.
Security guidelines for Nexon employees, security guidelines for service and application program development and operations, guidelines for information security, operation of informational systems, service guidelines, guidelines for protection of personal information, in-house security procedures. So when you join Nexon, you give in all these things. You have to agree to all these things. And according to the company policies and guidelines, Nexon employees cannot use Nexon's proprietary information for personal gain. Now, of course, the law supersedes what a company says. So, for instance, people have been given this example of non-competes. In most circumstances, and especially in the United States, non-competes are essentially worthless. There's very few examples of where they would be actionable. In fact, at the moment, they're trying to actually ban non-competes, full stop, because they're anti-competitive, and also at the same time, it's unfair for an employer to basically be able to say, you are an expert at this thing, so we're employing you to be an expert at this thing, but once you leave our company, you can't go and use your expertise to earn money. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So non-competes is irrelevant here. I've seen people bring that up, and I just want to dispel it on both sides. Non-competes play no factor. And of course, the company saying you agreed to these terms, so therefore you can't do X, Y, or Z, doesn't matter if it's not legally enforceable. So what their policies and guidelines
Wait, he said
say is
Z
just to
instead of
illustrate the
Z.
point that
Now I'm
all
confused.
employees were aware of what is principally, at least what I would believe, legal, which is if you work at our company on things that are paid on company time, you can then not go and disseminate or recreate the things that you were exactly paid to do and work on while at our company. So again, illustrate
so
that
tricky
Nexon
to-
takes their trade
to
secrets
walk that
seriously
line.
and informs all employees and gives them documentation of guidelines written by lawyers of what you can and cannot do. That's why this
I own
exists.
multiplayer
All of
shooters.
Nexon's
Where's my
employees
check
receive company
Activision?
training on information security at least once a year. Additionally, the company policies and guidelines posted on the company's main groupware are easily accessible by all Nexon employees. Nexon also requires its employees to sign an acknowledgement about work-related intellectual property acknowledged about company IP. Pursuant to this acknowledgement about company IP, any intellectual property rights in the company work product created by Nexon's employees during the course of their employment originate from and are vested in Nexon. Moreover, Nexon employees are prohibited from using or recreating any content that is similar or the same as the work-related inventions made at Nexon, even after the employees leave Nexon and join another employer. Now, this again is
The word similar is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
common sense. This is how the world works. You can't work on something and then just leave and go make the same thing. And some people get mixed up when you say same thing. I don't mean like I'm working on an FPS game, and if I leave and make an FPS game, therefore I'm in breach of contracting and be sued. Nobody's saying that. I'm saying
That's actually true though, because all FPS games are exactly the same.
that if you work at, for instance, a cola company and you know the exact list of ingredients that make that cola, and then you leave the company and make a rival company that makes a cola drink that has the exact same ingredients, that is presented in the exact same way, you're probably not legally in the right there. Probably a silly example, but you get why I'm going with like a really simple one on that one. Again, the rest of this section is just going over how we protect our trade secrets. Essentially, it goes over you need to connect to their VPN to get access. You need these one-time passwords, usage of IDs to get access to servers. All passwords must be at least 8 characters, combine alphabet, numbers, and symbols, and reset every 120 days.
Why would they
Why
do
is this
that though?
important? Why is it important to prove that their servers that host all of their trade secrets are difficult to get access to, heavily monitored, and constantly require resubmission of details and
Oh
IT
shit,
to
these are all
basically
expiring?
give you new access? It's because later on in the lawsuit,
Oh
they're
no.
going to list
In 9 minutes
the
these are all
actual
expiring.
theft of
Rip
trade
money.
secret, and how essentially the employee bypassed all of this trade secret protection that Nexon uses to gain access to data that they should not have had, which then they alleged that they later on went and developed a game that's substantially similar to P3 with. Then they talk about Choi and Terrence.
Wait, P3 was still like a working title that was somewhere on the time schedule to still be released, right? What are they saying that the game that the Dark and Darker was coming out, even though it was like stolen assets from P3, that it's like coming out before Nexon can release P3? Isn't that weird? We got like a smaller game studio with a bunch of people who got bullied out / kicked out / fired. Can release that game faster and develop that whole game faster than someone who already has all of these assets. That in turn should already pretty much showcased that they probably had a bunch of stuff stolen. Otherwise, how could they develop it faster, right?
Were hired in April 16th, 2018.
EXP do
They
coupons
previously
give?
worked at a subsidiary of Nexon
Yeah,
before
it depends.
this, and they're just setting up the timeline for, you know... they
Depends on
knew
your
about
level,
these
I believe.
things. They were inducted into the company. They had access to these resources, and of course the servers and
If you click here,
processes
it'll
to protect
show.
the
So
trade
for me,
secrets.
it'll give
Who was Choi? He was the director of the P3 project until his termination on July 21st,
76.5
2021.
million
What did he
per.
do? They just explained, you know, how important
Per
it was,
coupon.
what he did, and his roles and duties. Who was Terrence? He was at Nexon. He was the head of the P3 design team during the entirety of the P3 project. What did he do? Explains. And then they explain the stages of game development. Why do they do this? Well, basically they're putting forward how a game is made, because then later on they're going to argue, why was Dark&Darker made so quickly? How did they avoid A, B, and C? Because they skipped straight to D, right? Because the majority of a game being made, and this is true for all corporate structure.
Oh, he's saying it now,
it's not
yeah.
true for indie structure, which is, of course, what I assume IronMace's is going to argue. In corporate structure, this is how it works. You pitch a game, the game gets approved. You prototype the game, then the game has to get approved from there. Then you go into pre-production, and the game has to get approved from there. Then you go into production, the game has to get approved from there. And most games fail between A, B, and C. They fail between pitching, prototyping, and pre-production. Most games that are created by AAA developers in these big studios never reach production, they never reach post-production, and they certainly never...
yeah, imagine how many, like,
launch.
really cool
Why
fucking
they are
games
doing
just
this?
never...
One, because of, as I've just explained, the development timeline of Dark&Darker, how did they get to production and, in fact, be releasing playable versions of the game in 10 months? Was there no pitching?
I mean, a lot of this is just very similar to, like big pharma stuff, right? People would be like, oh, you know, it only costs you like 3 cents to manufacture a pill. Why the hell is it $13? It's like, well, first of all, because of all of the R&D that went into making the product. Just once you have it and it's working, all of the fucking testing, and then all of the 16,000 other products that went into the same, went through the same process that didn't make it, and you still have to have a company that can still keep the doors open. You have a cost of doing business, right? But it's I didn't have Eco 101 ever. I don't understand what money is.
No
Takes they seem to bleed over into this.
Two, because they're going to explain how basically IronMace stole all of these things and didn't need to do these by virtue of the files that were taken on the server.
If you want to talk about the problems of like raising prices and all that shit, you have to be like publicly lobbying and talking about how shitty your healthcare system is. That's a healthcare system problem. That's not a pharma problem. The pharma just has to try to, you know, work its way through the healthcare system and stay alive and keep making drugs. And they do pretty well considering how shitty that system is. But you need your healthcare system to be fixed to make sure that those things don't happen. They happen because of that, you know.
Server and the people working at the studio in the first place, and 3, to show you that they used a lot of money and a lot of cost.
Monster
and
collection.
Basically, the product was already going to be in development and was determined as a viable commercial success prior to it being taken from them and them having to shelve the product due to the fact that people stole the files, was fired, and then left and took half the team with them. That's why they're setting this up. That's why this exists. So I could go through all of this, but it's just going to be explaining what I just said. You can read it. I'll leave it on screen for a couple of seconds so you can pause and read it yourself. If anyone wants me to do like a video where I go through literally line by line of this and explain, again, I'm not a lawyer, but this is a...
Dude, how long were these lawyers working on this draft and shit? Like, how much money goes into the lawyers working on this and clearing all this? Jesus.
Pretty dense document to go through in the first place, so I don't want to get hung up on like 50 minutes of just reading
Is there a link to it?
Of game development. As you can see, during these 11 months of pitching, prototyping, and pre-production, Nexon invested an enormous amount of time and resources.
It doesn't even have a link to the file.
Nexon
God damn it, dude.
Worked exclusively on P3 project, including Nexon's director and then all of the main employees. They invested 1.1 billion Korean currency, which is $841,944 into the P3 project to get it to the point where everything went wrong. Now, again, they argue that with this investment of time, money, effort, resources, Nexon essentially had so much information put into this that had economic real value that would not be accessible to anybody outside the company, that these constitute trade secrets. That's what a trade secret is, right? Nobody would have had access to this data of this 11 months worth of investment from Nexon, other than the people who worked on it. That's what a trade secret would be. Then they go over what some of these trade secrets would be, other than the, you know, tangible assets. Internal playtest, where various target groups within the company played the game, completed a detailed survey to provide feedback of the fun elements of the game. So this shows that a lot of the time and a lot of the budget on people.
Dude, I need to be a fucking playtester. What is Corporson doing? Corporson, get me in on a real job, dude.
Structures. They go through this.
Oh, I need to open this one.
What is the game's
Rock
concept?
Spirit and Permanent Lithium
now
Hearts.
We have a prototype. What do people feel about the game? What could we change?
Where do we get
before
this?
We go too far into development?
Is my ice lightning or something?
And spent a bunch of money on it. After it reached the pre-production stage on May 13th, 2021, Nexon ran another playtest to P3 with a
you used that money for Maple Story?
Collect qualitative feedback.
I wonder if it would have made a dent.
Look and feel of the FPS perspective, proposed improvements to P3, and attractive features about P3. They identified the strengths, including the implementation of PvP, PvE,
the strengths?
and then based on the positive feedback of the director group, they determined P3 would likely become a commercial success. And on May 11th, 2021, the P3 project team was notified that P3 received the green light for pre-production. On June 1st, 2021, the P3 project officially kicked off its pre-production stage. Now, I've seen a lot of people, and I've been saying, you're wrong, and you need to wait for the lawsuit to come out so you can see that you're wrong. A lot of people have been saying P3 was cancelled and Nexon is upset that, you know, these people left and made a game that they weren't going to make anyway. They were making the game. It was approved.
Dude, even if they weren't going to make it, it's those things are still their property, and you still can't fucking steal it.
Proved to be made. You can see it here. And people are obviously going to go, Nexon's lying. You are not going to lie about
Team
this
Rarmar War.
information.
Raar maar waar. No, raar. The A sound is two A's.
They literally had the play
two next to each other.
If you've ever worked for a big company, you know all of this shit is filed. It's logged. They're going to be able to prove from digitally signed documents that this game was in production, that it was approved, that they'd decided it was going to be a commercial success and they were going to move forward with it. They're going to be able to prove it again with testimony from employees who are still working at the company, who were not only overseeing and managers, but also people who were working within this small team making the game. So again,
is it essentially just like a bunch of people that either got fired and were like, we're yoinking this, and we think the product is going, we think it's not gonna get made anyway, so like no harm no foul. And they thought they wouldn't get away with it if it wasn't for those meddling legal documentation.
Just another thing that publicly people are completely wrong about. Is there a chance that Nexon have decided to file a lawsuit where they're lying about tiny details that literally could be proven wrong and destroy their whole case? I guess in some kind of alternate fucking bizarre
$580 full price
for the case?
But
no,
everyone has a
now again, they go over many of these trade secrets were saved as computer files on Nexon's secured company server. Why are they doing that?
What are you talking about, Salty? Is it EpiPen?
Stealing the trade secrets while working at P3. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Nexon temporarily permitted its employees to work remotely and access company data with strict policies regarding what content could be accessed externally. Indeed, in March 2020, Nexon informed its employees that they could not use any external storage systems without express authorization from Nexon. On August 31st, 2020, Choi requested permission from the IT security new development manager to export P3 source code outside of Nexon to his private server located in Seosan, Korea. Nice. Choi stated that exporting the source code was necessary to maximize efficiency while his team worked remotely during the pandemic. On information and belief, from August 2020 to January 2021, Choi installed Git on his external server to access the exported P3 source code. This is confirmed by IronMace, their statements, and by Nexon. So again, just another statement of fact. Why did they allow him to do this? Well, the P3 project was only in the early pitching stage with minimal source code
300? Damn.
So it wasn't in production yet. It wasn't greenlit to continue. They'd not done substantial work on actual asset. And by asset, I mean code.
But I mean, if you're going into healthcare and healthcare costs and stuff, if you're just like regular wage, like a wagee in Belgium, I think your healthcare costs are about $150 a year, I think. And that covers a lot. I mean, I can Google it, I guess, for me, how much it would be. Let's see, how much is it? Buy now. Online pharmacy 24/7. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Oh, 200. Nice. I wonder if you don't make a certain amount of money, if you can basically get almost all of the money back. I don't know which one that was. Oh, 39. 39 to 40.
Design files, things like that. They were still pitching the game. There was nothing massively substantial that was a big concern.
Spend $100 to sit on urgent care table for 5 minutes for the person to tell me to fuck off to the hospital.
However, they did not granted permission to export build files to an external server. Again, I'm going to assume there's going to be actual time.
Well, you guys might not like that, but there's only one thing that you can really do to get your healthcare funded better in the US, and that's actually paying taxes. Actually having your taxes do something for you. Not like right now where you pay a bunch of taxes, but all your roads are shit, your education is shit, you don't have public transport, and your healthcare is shit. I don't know what you guys are paying taxes for over there in the US.
Stamped.
I truly have no idea.
I don't believe a company as big,
elect better people. Do more research on who you vote for.
Substantial files on things like this.
I don't know what to tell you.
Anything will almost certainly have been kept. Starting in or around December 2020 through to June of 2021.
Yeah, they spend more per person than any other country and have
began transferring
subpar outcomes
via various methods.
Among the worst of all first world countries. It's kind of weird.
Instructed his right-hand man, Wu Ming Yang, P3 program part leader, to export
defense
build
budget
files. He did so from Nexon's internal Jenkins server to his external server via remote desktop protocol, December 2020 to June 2021, FTP, file transfer platform, from February 2021 to April of 2021, and then via FTP, by which Choi automated Nexon's internal Jenkins server to send build files to his private servers on a daily basis from April to June of 2021. By January 2021, Choi had instructed the P3 project team to write source code using in-house Git that Choi had installed and mirrored.
Can I at least get this to
server.
Epic? What's going on, bro?
He did not request or
oh, I'm
receive
using the wrong
authorization
cubes.
from Nexon to install or mirror the Git on his external server. So again, I imagine they're going to be able to prove this, because it's a very specific claim with dates to make without the ability to do so. And people are going to say, well, they're not proving it to us. They're not showing us right now in this document. That's not how a lawsuit works.
Can I really not
Once
click
they
on
build
this?
the
Because
defense
that
and this
thing's
goes to
okay.
discovery, that's when this shit's going to come out. And we will have all the receipts. We'll be able to see everything. By February 2021, the P3 project was past the early prototyping stage. Therefore, Choi knew or should have known that the new development manager's temporary approval was no longer valid. You can argue, obviously, here that he should have known. Again, ignorance is not a defense in any sense of the word. In apparent recognition that his export of P3 source code was unauthorized on February 18, 2021, over a month after Choi set up the mirroring to his external server to exploit source code, Choi again requested authorization from Nexon's new development manager to export P3 source code. He expressly rejected Choi's request. When making his request, Choi did not inform the new development manager that he had already mirrored the Git to his external server to export P3 source code, as well as transferred P3 build files. So, I'm doing this anyway. I'm going to go and ask for permission. I don't tell them I'm already doing it. They say no. I continue doing it. In response to this request, on the same day, the new development manager advised that Choi and his team needed to come into the office to work on P3 in person. Why are they doing this? Well, because he's saying, we need to be able to do this to work efficiently, because I need this private server
Quebec defense title of worst roads in North America according to
then. If you can't work efficiently from home, you can't.
2021 study by the Canadian Automobile Association claimed that Quebec drivers spent an average of $258 per year on maintenance costs caused by poor roads. The most in Canada and more than double the national average. Nice.
Do it on the server. That would be an infringement on how we protect our trade secrets.
To be fair, if you have weather that ranges from extremely cold to extremely warm, and you have extended durations of very cold weather, it does make it really hard to maintain like decent roads. Those things get fucked.
You've all got to come into the office and work. Again, this will be documented, and then they explain it. Now they had more substantial.
As far as being careful who we vote for, preach that to those that continue to vote for people that don't at all have the people's interest in mind. Politicians will always have the people's interest in mind, but only the people that vote for them, because they want to do what the people want for them, so that they can get reelected and do more stuff and stay important and stay in power and keep doing more stuff. You're just electing the wrong people. Or you have to realize that you're living in a divided country, and it's more important that you rally for your cause and get more people on your side.
And valuable source code, thus to protect the source
code. 60 Celsius difference in 6 months. Yeah, exactly. That's insane.
Rather than exploiting the source code and work on it from home, Choi agreed to do.
Even worse, I hear the potholes in Quebec don't speak French. Oh.
So, in April of 2021, so look at the timeline. February 18th, he asks for permission. April 2021, doesn't have permission. He set up an additional private server in his home in a different physical location. Even though Choi had been explicitly instructed not to export or store P3 project data outside the company, he continued to do so through June 2021. They've literally admitted to doing this publicly, by the way. So when people say, maybe Nexon's lying, they've admitted to doing this. You can go read it in their own statement. In fact, from February to April 2021, Choi and some other person whose name I can't pronounce, a P3 team member, transferred P3 files to Choi's external servers through various methods.
You can say no.
8 separate exports of P3 build files via FTP. Now, why would you need to do this if you're from February 18th working in the studio? If you're not working from home, why would you need to be transferring for multiple months after the fact, after not being given permission? Why would you need to be transferring all of these things that you know you're not supposed to be transferring to private servers? If you read through the Nexon blind post, which is anonymous employees confirmed to be working at Nexon, they state that already by this point, Choi was upset and was trying to convince people to leave the studio and go and make a new studio, saying he had investment already and they were going to just go and make the game again. And basically...
So this guy was just like hyper invested into this product, like his passion product, really wanted it to win. It was looking like it wasn't going to make it. And he just got mad and he wanted to salvage whatever he could and get out, take some good people with him and still fucking push the game. And it felt like he could because he was one of the main guys was working on it. And that it would be more of a crime to not have it see the light of day than to yoink it from Nexon is what it's looking like.
Cut Nexon out, which of course, as a narrative, this lines up perfectly with. Starting on April 6th, 2021, after the new development manager expressly had told Choi he could not export the P3 project data, Choi doubled down on his theft. In addition to the source code mirroring that began in January 2021, he continued to download thousands of P3 build files. By doing so, he exported 2,747 P3 build files to his external server between April 6th, 2021.
We should launch a GoFundMe to help the USA citizens.
19 P3 build files to his personal server in Songnam between April 7th and March 13th. So he's doing it at different time periods on 2 different servers while being expressly told, no, you can't do that. Despite the express instruction saying that
you rescinded that invitation real quick, huh?
Choi connected to the in-house Git to download P3 source code on Nexon's PC and then exported the source code to his external servers. To minimize his conduct, Choi dissembled in public statements that the use of this private server was necessary to develop P3 during the period when COVID-19 prevented employees from working in Nexon's office. This is the statement I'm talking about. It's on Reddit. You can go read it. But no such private servers were necessary because Choi, like all the Nexon employees, had access to cloud resources through Nexon's arrangement with OneDrive and AWS that would have remedied any issues of connecting to the company server while working remotely. Furthermore, and again, how a lawsuit works is they're building the case here. They're building the timeline of what happened. This is not the totality of everything. These are just points. They're threads on the spider web that represents the entire web. Furthermore, of the 20 separate downloads of stolen P3 source code and art resources to Choi's server located in Sosam, 18 downloads occurred after Nexon lifted its COVID-19 work-from-home policy on June 2nd, 2021. Of 20, 18 occurred after the fact. Now, his excuse for this was that he forgot about the server that he wasn't allowed to set up, by the way. He forgot about the server they told him not to have. And again, they will be able to prove this. No other team at Nexon in the similar stages of game development.
He forgot skull emoji.
As P3 exported or transferred source code or any other proprietary information to external servers during the course of remote working. So what is the point of that? Why are they saying that? Well, if everyone else could...
How does your client plead? My client pleads that he forgo, Your Honor.
Work from home
With the skull emoji? With the skull emoji. Okay, let the record show that there was a skull emoji in the official statement.
During this period. Why then is this one person who later on went to develop a game that is substantially similar to the game that he was developing for us, using our trade secrets, our resources, why is he the only one that has done those things to have needed these servers that he was told he couldn't have? That's the point they're making. Choi plots to steal P3 for himself. At the same time he was transferring Nexon's P3 data and files to his private servers without company authorization, he was soliciting P3 project team members to leave Nexon and develop the P3 project outside of Nexon. So bear in mind, again, dates. June 2nd, Nexon lifted the work from home policy, which means after the...
Okay, if you've read anything like up to this point, how can you come away with this thinking like big company bad, small company good, abuse of power, blah, blah, blah? This is looking like really fucking bad, no?
At this point, there would be no reason at all, ever, to have these files. He sent 18 of the 20 downloads were done after this. Now look at the timeline of this. According to interviews Nexon's internal audit team conducted with the P3 project team members, Choi began approaching certain P3 project team members in April of 2021 and spoke with each team member individually in June 2021 to urge them to leave Nexon with him to recreate a game similar to P3 outside of Nexon. Confirmed by the Blind Post, they're going to have recordings and transcripts of these employees being...
Yo, where's my luck roll, bro?
And interviewed. So again, he's already transferring the files in April. He's already talking about doing this in April. They were back in on June 2nd, and 18 of the transfers happened after June 2nd. In June, he was speaking with each member individually. So prior to the majority of the file transfers, he was already plotting to leave the company and take people with him to go and recreate the game.
What the fuck is this?
To members to leave, he lied to them by telling them that Nexon had no intent to release P3 when Nexon had, in fact, approved of moving forward with P3. He explained to the P3 project team members that because they had created the game once before, they would be able to complete and release the game within 1 or 1.5 years.
I know, right?
According to interviews with the team members, Choi told them that he had secured external venture financing for the new game, even while he was employed at Nexon. Looking like some bad news, guys. Nexon learned of his misconduct. They learned in June of 2021 because one of the P3 project team members went to the higher-ups and said, this guy's trying to steal your game, he's trying to poach the staff. They then moved to audit its server logs, leading to discovery that Choi had been transferring data to his external servers without authorization. There's a crazy smoking gun coming up here in a minute, guys, that people are not going to want to believe, and I'm not sure how people are going to mentally spin this other than, fuck Nexon, Nexon bad, we side with Robin Hood. As soon as Nexon discovered his misconduct in June of 2021, Nexon demanded that he turn over the information stored on the external servers.
No, Robin Hood
so
bad
they
also.
could, of course, assess whether the stolen information had been disclosed to any third parties and what steps Nexon needed to take to prevent further damage. Choi intentionally spoliates evidence. After Nexon confronted him, he agreed to turn over his external service to Nexon so that the company could determine whether the data was disclosed to a third party. In fact, he signed a written forensic agreement with Nexon to turn over his servers. However, Choi quickly changed his mind and refused. Instead, according to Choi, he instructed an acquaintance to permanently delete the files on his personal servers. According to Choi, the service was wiped multiple times so that the data could not be recovered. Now, I'd like to know how he said this. If this is in text, they can prove you stole the data. They can prove you didn't have
Jesus.
They can prove you didn't have permission.
Nexon bad too. Yeah, I mean, these things aren't mutually exclusive. They can also
prove that you signed.
Like I said, the guy that came into the chat and started yelling that like MapleStory was bad, Nexon was bad. Like I'm not disagreeing up to this point. But what's your point? Where are you going with this?
A document saying I will turn it over. If they can also prove if you wrote this in
all
text,
game devs are bad. Activision sucks. Blizzard is ass. Right?
Somebody to permanently delete the
bullshit.
files you told them you would give them. You're deleting evidence.
Where are you going with this, sir?
I know, again, I'm going to have to repeat this because it is worth repeating. This person is being criminally investigated in Korea.
Yeah.
We already have precedent of somebody doing this in Korea. They went to prison. They were fined. They were found guilty for doing this. If this is true, which again, I don't know why you'd lie about this when a court is going to order you to turn over the evidence of this. All of this to this point, you would not make these allegations.
But you watched a Moist Critical video, it's true.
In my opinion. Because what's going to happen is they're going to say, provide the receipts. If you can provide the receipts for this, nobody on the planet Earth can argue that what this person did was right. All they can argue is that, fuck Nexon, I want the game to come out anyway, I don't care if they stole. Which, thankfully has no bearing in a court of law. Again, I can't say legally whether or not this is actionable. Now, the problem is that they say here,
Okay,
if
made a
what
small
Troy says
hobby
is
demo
true,
game for
which
CS
of course they
guys.
cannot confirm, which of course if they have this communication, they still can't confirm because they've never had access to the server, whether or not it was deleted repeatedly to make it impossible to actually forensically account. But if they did do that on this server, then the wiping of the personal server thwarted Nexon's ability to directly confirm the full extent of the data he stole and to directly confirm whether Troy exported data from his personal servers to third parties or to another location where he could continue to access and use the stolen data.
Yeah, now
So
he could just move it
have
somewhere
this
else,
server
right?
with all the data still on, but he's
Jeez.
never turned over the server, never provided evidence it's been wiped, never provided evidence that they haven't got access to the data still. He could have backed up the data from the server to another computer, unnetworked, whatever else, and then used that.
No, because it's
to build
deleted,
the
there's
game.
no
That's
trace
what
of
they're
that
arguing,
of
of
that
course.
copying
Troy's
anymore.
admission that he willfully spoliated evidence raises an inference that his private servers contained evidence that he misappropriated and continues to
Spoliated,
misappropriate
not
Nexon's
spoiler.
trade secrets. This is blatantly obvious. Again, if they can prove that he literally said, yeah, I've instructed someone to permanently delete it even after I've said I've...
Well, they said that here, right? They must have proof for that, like either in writing or in a recording or in a phone call or something. Because I assume they would, if they have phone calls, they record literally everything. If they said that he agreed to give over those servers, and then was like, oh, by the way, I told someone to wipe them multiple times, so there's absolutely no fucking trace evidence. Like, why would you do that? Like, you can't really. That won't hold up in court. But why would he do that if there was nothing wrong going on? It feels a little.
Determine I've not done anything really wrong.
Seems like there's
Why
a
would he do
little,
that?
at least something
Why would an
sussy going
innocent
on.
person agree to turn over the server and then tell a friend to permanently delete the server? Let me know, somebody, why that would be the case. Although the full extent of Troy's theft cannot be fully known because refusing to turn over the server, in July 2021, Nexon's internal audit team conducted an investigation that revealed that between December 2020 and June of 2021, Troy acquired and transferred without authorization at least 11,602 key files of the P3 project from Nexon server to his private servers in 2020 and 2021. These 11,602 files contain P3 trade secrets that include but are not limited to source code, art resources, and build files. Below are a breakdown of the files, the all 11,600. What are they? Development production program, visual data sources of levels. I'm not going through all of them.
5,000.
Now on July.
No, let me. What? No, not that. 318 files of development production program, 4,673 files of visual data sources, level and accessory elements, 1,061 elements, 3,861 visual data source, character and accessory elements. Planning data just as game rules, 1,321 files. If it's, I don't know, if it's like visuals and you slightly alter it, I mean, I feel like a lot of video games do that. But if you're really going into like the planning data, the game rules, the game mechanics, like how are we going to, that's really what makes the game, you know? Like one game can have like a ruby item or like a garnet ore, and another game can have a garnet ore. That there's like nothing going on there. But if you have like, this is how we're going to do crafting, this is how we're going to limit quantity, this is how we're going to make people want to go crafting and want to go mining, and you steal that kind of shit, then you're really getting closer to like the essence of the game that you're yoinking, you know. 260 files of program source code and 108 build fields on game prototype. Oh, build files. Build files is like the thing that would eventually lead to the actual, you know, .exe executable
data sources of levels.
Game, right?
I'll not go through all of them. Now on July 12th, 2021, they terminated him. Why is this a big point?
Egregious misconduct.
Nexon has a massive pro-labor union that essentially means that you're not getting terminated. If he was terminated without evidence, if the evidence wasn't overwhelming that he was worth disciplining and terminating, they would have been fighting this, and he would have been winning.
If it doesn't crash, is it really
his job?
Is it really an
Then
Nexon
we'll
game?
move on to what did IronMace do wrong? Because so far that's been all Troy. What has Troy done wrong? Well, what happened was, following Troy's termination, 1 month later, again we see July 12th, 1 month later, August 9th, Park left Nexon. Park, Terrence. 9 other P3 project members representing nearly 50% of the team followed suit and left Nexon. On information and belief, each of the P3 project members who left Nexon joined
We said it had about like 25 or so people work on P3. Oh, these people must have been working on... Wait, how much did they spend? You have 25 people, and they said they invested about $840,000 into it? How much do these devs make? Like at least 100K a year, probably, right? If they're working at Nexon must be paying pretty competitively, I think. Maybe less than that, like 80K. You got like 10 years worth of value, but if you have over 20 people like 25 people working on it, then you've only got like 0.4 years? No, hang on. 10 years, 120 months, 120 divided by 25. It's like 5. So it's like a 25-man team that worked on it for 5 months, right? So it's not like a 16-year project or something, just to put it in perspective.
And they were the ones that had been solicited by Choi to leave Nexon's employment and join IronMace prior to Choi's termination. So again, remember, he was soliciting people to leave long before Nexon even knew what the fuck was going on. On October 20th, 2 months after he'd left Nexon, he founded IronMace. He co-founded IronMace and became the CEO. Choi, as well as the other 9 members, joined IronMace shortly after. Now, a question to ask would be, why would Terrence co-found the company and become CEO when he was below Choi in the pecking?
So this green dev's got around 60K? Yeah, because I was thinking that might be a little bit high. Because game dev is not the same as just being like... Where's that? Yeah. 2.2 million Korean won a year. Average base salary, senior. And since P3 was more of like a side project stuff, it might be 60K NX per year. No, they're not in Beam Brigade. I would say they're probably on the early end, since they're like so eager to just leave for a game. If half the people leave for a game, I would be inclined to think that they're more on the like the entry to average area. Wait, median? Yeah, so let's say 60K, I guess. Well, no, this is 60 million. What is it in dollar redos? Wait, is it 60K? This says 60 million won. Average hourly rate 32,000. Dude, you need to do something with your currency. If you're making 32,540.27 per hour, you just need to like do a currency squish, you know? Just like divide by 1,000. Like what the fuck is this? Just divide everything by 1,000. Lots of millionaires in Korea. Yeah, you're like a billionaire after working for a few years. 67 million is more like 51K USD. Ah, okay, see? Okay, so 51K. They spent 840K. So that's 16, 17, let's say 17 years worth of development. Over like 25 people. Yeah, okay, so 25 divided by 17. No, other way around. 17 divided by 25. That's probably like 8. What is it, like 8 months? Like a, because it's like half, it's like 9.5. It's almost 2/3 of a year, a little bit less. So like 7 months, 7.5 to 8 months worth of development.
But have Choi be the controlling shareholder of
and those people
IronMace,
leaving
we've seen this.
basically means like 3 months worth of full development just leaving your company.
To show the shares before.
Of
Seems a little bit
11
odd,
people?
to be honest. With most of the key P3 project team members gone, it was difficult for Nexon to continue the P3 project. IronMace completes the demo P3 and renames it Dark&Darker. Now they argue here, as described below, IronMace could not have developed Dark&Darker so rapidly unless it used Nexon's trade secrets to do so. Now I've seen...
Yeah, that's part of an argument, but that cannot be your whole case, right? It's like, well, otherwise they wouldn't have had it so fast. That's probably true, but you're going to have to prove that. You can't just say that and be like, okay, cool. But that's one thing I was saying in the beginning as well, right? Like, it's not as likely that just in a few months you can just bring out this fully fleshed game, and it's led by someone who got kicked out for like stealing files and trade secrets, and he yoinked like half the development team of the game that it looks a lot like it's all of these things compounding on each other.
People clown on this argument and say, lol, just because Nexon can't develop games fast doesn't mean that Terrence and the boys can't, because they're such good developers. If that's the case, why did P3, after 10 months of development, basically only just get greenlit for pre-production? Is it because game development's probably a little bit harder?
Oh, he says
than
10 months now?
that
Okay.
time, as Nexon claims here, and what they were paid to do. Pitching ideas for a game, which took months, getting feedback, prototyping, figuring out what the design of the game was going to be, and iterating on things over and over again to the point where they have...
Exactly, and they're doing they already have all the R&D, like everything's already done. They can just start manufacturing the pills immediately, right?
Add a cohesive game. While I'm not saying you can't develop a game from the ground up in 10 months, if you're doing that, you're probably copying another game idea, right? Not one-to-one. You're probably just like, oh, I like Call of Duty. I'm going to make a Call of Duty style lobby-based shooter. We have everything in front of us to just basically do similar, using our own code, using our own assets, using some unique gameplay mechanics, so it's not a one-to-one rip. That's the argument of you can't copyright a genre, right? But as we'll see as this document continues...
The steps take longer in a bigger company for the sole reason of that you always have competing products that are looking for that funding, that are looking for that space, right? A bigger company is running a whole bunch of products at the same time, and they have to balance their portfolio of who gets what, who gets which resources at what time. A really small development company usually just has one big product that they're working on, and maybe like, a smaller team of like 2 or 3 people are working on like a fucking mobile game on the side or something, and the art department or whatever is like constantly making some stuff to see if they can come up with something cool. But in general, at least when you're starting out and your dev company is like 2 months old, you have one thing that you're working on, because that one thing has to succeed. If it doesn't, your whole studio has nothing, so you have to have everyone working on the same thing and make it as good as it possibly can be.
That's not what IronMace did. They developed P3 and just called it Dark&Darker. Again, they argue here they had no need to go through the concept pre-production prototyping stage because they did it all for 11 months on Nexon's expense. Indeed, in self-serving public statements, IronMace has set forth a timeline that it contends shows there is nothing unusual in how quickly it was able to release a demo of Dark&Darker. Notably absent from that timeline is any reference to the pitching, prototyping, and pre-production stages of Dark&Darker. The reason those stages are absent from IronMace's time...
There's nothing weird, okay, that we were able to launch the game that quickly. Because we had all the files, and then we launched it. But how did you get to all the files? We're not going to bore you with the details. It's perfectly normal.
Timeline is that they were performed by Nexon. Defendants simply misappropriated Nexon's trade secrets to skip over those stages. By stealing Nexon's trade secrets, defendants conferred significant economic advantages to themselves. For example, the majority of video games fail before they get past
We're
the
just that
prototyping
good.
stage. When a game fails at the end of the prototype...
That's the other thing that's weird. Is like we're just that good. We're just such good developers. So are you saying that Nexon hires really good developers and Nexon is actually really like good company with good eye for talent because all of those people came from Nexon? It's like, oh shit.
The typing stage, every hour of human effort and every dollar of investment in the game is a loss. So basically they had a company that they could just make a game. There was no risk because they knew the game was already deemed by experts in the industry that have made many very popular games that this would be a commercial success. All the hard work had been done. It had been prototyped. It had been tested by multiple people. They had surveys from multiple groups within the company saying, this is good, this is bad, change this, change that. They'd gone through 11 months of substantial effort.
Wait, actually, so it's even worse than I said in the beginning. I said in the beginning, maybe they thought it was going to get canned, so they took the files and ran and then developed it because it was going to get canned anyway. But it actually looks like they thought that the product was going to be so good and that somebody who was kind of like higher up in the project was like, we should like sabotage the project by leaving and by taking half of the people with us. And if enough people leave, they'll have to ditch the project and then we can just continue it. So that's like an extra level of malice on top of that.
To get a game idea.
God, this looks so bad. If this is all true, this looks so bad.
Is the exact same fucking game.
I'm going to be honest, from everything that I heard, I thought it was just like one guy in one other studio had some some assets that he kind of used that belonged to Nexon. The way I thought it, I heard it everywhere was like Nexon is like bullying some random studio because one person who works on there took a few things as he left the company, accidentally in his briefcase, and he might have used a few things in the video game. And Nexon is now like swinging their dick around to say like you're a bad boy, you were a bad boy. But this is sounding a lot more like some fucking corporate level breaking multiple tiers of contracts and laws internationally, and this is looking worse and worse with every single line.
Again, they argue that Choi had knowledge.
Yeah, just a few thousand, tens of thousands, 11,000 assets. Yeah,
Nexon employees,
Jesus.
Which gave them a significant advantage in developing Dark&Darker. The more than 11,000 files that Choi transferred also gave defendants a significant economic advantage. And then they go through the files. What happened with the files? Mm-hmm. Well, these files contained a log of all 733 revisions to the program files for P3 over the 11-month development process.
11
By
months.
having a list of all 733 revisions, the defendants had a step-by-step guide to recreate P3 IronMace and accelerate the development of Dark&Darker, avoiding the time and expense of the trial and error process that Nexon was required to engage in. So they basically had a wiki.
Bro, do you think they can somehow find that at IronMace and like see that they went through all of those steps, like the same steps, the way that Nexon had for P3, and then basically, that's, man, what can they say against this? Because the way that he said it, like a bunch of the stuff was already admitted by them. Like all the stuff that's been admitted already looks so horrible for them. Or for Choi.
How do I make ramen noodles? But obviously in a much more complex version. How do I make P3? This is what this guy had on his server, which he wouldn't turn over and instead destroyed purposefully after saying he would turn it over. Then they go over the other files. What about the level and accessory element that Choi transferred to his server? They go over the lighting, the actual levels, aka the map. They go over the visual source data, which is data relating to display information and effects, such as the UI. And they name here as an example the UI compass.
Jesus.
Then they go over character
Maybe he
and
declassified it in his mind.
Which is
yeah,
movement,
maybe.
environmental changes according to game conditions, appearance, movement, and skills dictated by the character ability and gaming condition are substantially similar. Then the planning data. It's critical at every stage of game development because it assesses the overall balance of the game and evaluates each character component, skill, equipment vis-a-vis each character. Then it goes over, because of the files that they had, that's why the games are so similar, because he had access to all the files. Then talks about the game prototype, the build files, which you would absolutely not be allowed to transfer to a private server. Anyone working at a company like this would know you're not allowed to do that. You've been told you can't do that. P3 game.exe is a build file that runs P3 and is a prototype playable version of the game that also shows the source code result of the build. It's included in the file. It allows people to just unzip the file and run the game. It took Nexon 11 months to develop its prototype.
Wait, actually, the p3game.exe is included in the p3 game client _448 zip file. A compressed version allows the player to unzip the file and run the actual game.
Type build files for P3.
That's not a build file. That's like the executable.
It's important because they contain game design, artwork, and planning data. They essentially serve as a blueprint for developing the game. Access to this would dramatically expedite the planning and designing stages of game development. Because P3 build files would serve as a guide on the history of P3 development and planning direction, they would be useful to all IronMace employees working on completing P3 under the name Dark&Darker. Moreover, with all of P3's packaging data at their fingertips, IronMace could save significant amount of R&D, research and development time, and resources by simply referring to the P3 build files of completed concept work and art designs. Then they go
R&D time. They said the thing.
Infringement of copyright, which is just going to be their US filed copyrights for certain things. Now, what are they alleging here for the source code copyright? They're saying that developing source code is hard, and it's implausible that defendants could have written new, non-infringing source code from scratch in the short time that IronMace has been in existence. It's much more plausible that defendants use Nexon's P3 code as a base, which they refined and augmented to develop the source code for Dark&Darker. Now, people can argue whether or not you could build Dark&Darker in 10 months and get the game in people's hands within that time period. You could make that argument, and that's what argument they will be making in court. And I'll be very interested to see what they say.
Oh, they had 10 months?
Maybe this
that's
is
a lot
all
longer.
a big coincidence. Maybe these things that they have him on transferring the files, having the files, saying he'll give them the server, deleting the server, telling people he wants to leave the company and remake the game anyway, leaving the company, remaking the game anyway. Maybe this is all a big coincidence, and they're going to prove that despite all of those coincidences, he definitely didn't use any of the files.
Yeah, that's still possible.
He provably stole. Maybe I'm going to have egg on my face, but I'm looking at evidence. I'm not looking at what I want to be true, and it's going to get worse in it.
No, but egg on your face. I don't think he's saying in any way like that it's 100% like a slam dunk and they have no case whatsoever. But he's saying that it looks that if all of the things that are mentioned here are true, that they're just royally screwed. But I think you shouldn't be cheering for anyone here to win or for anyone to lose. Like justice should be done, right?
In a minute.
But I have the very same vibe when it's like one sports team A goes against sports teams B. People are always asking like, who are you rooting for, or who do you want to win? It's like, I don't give a fuck who wins. I just want to see a good match. Like, it could be either one. I want the refereeing to be clean. I want the teams to be have good sportsmanship, and I hope to see a good match. And if there are more goals, that's cool. And if there are fewer, then hopefully we can celebrate those, and maybe they're sensational. But like, inserting yourself can only lead to becoming like incredibly biased. By the way, there's no good value there.
Wrong. I don't know again if it's legally actionable, but from a common sense
no, Maple Story playing is rooting for Nexon. Yeah, that's true.
At the time Choi was soliciting team members, he clandestinely transferred at least 260 separate source code files to his private servers. Dark&Darker, which is substantially the same game as P3, is the culmination of Choi's plan to steal Nexon source code so that he could recreate P3 at IronMace. Now, they're going to go over audio-visual copyrights, which is sound and sight of what you're seeing, what you're hearing.
You know, honestly, if there's like a bunch of gamers here, if there's like a large group of people who like agree with the whole fucking Charlie take, whatever it is, it would be really cool if they showed like Dark&Darker, just like the base gameplay, and they showed like the P3 gameplay. I guess people already know which one is which, right? But they show like both of the games and without telling you which one is which, and ask people to indicate which one is which. And if they, if it's like a 50-50 split, if people just don't know, that would be that would be like immediately like, well, doesn't that show that they're so similar that you have no idea what game is really what? If they're so similar, then as a gamer, you'd have to be like, yeah, that's pretty, that's pretty fucked.
It's been infringed in copyright, and then the idea of the game. They
talk
about how
vids of
the idea
P3. I don't know. Nexon P3 game. I mean, it doesn't even have a title yet. I don't know if there is. The weakest lawsuit, Nexon versus IronMace. Ooh, that's gonna sound. It's got an arrow pointed at the thing, and it says it dumb. Asmongold reacts. What did Asmongold react to?
Dark&Darker is a stolen IP. Is this game stolen? Here we go. Let's watch it. Why not? This is interesting, I'm sure.
Good morning, everyone. My name is One Peg.
One Peg. Wait, who's the guy who says it's the weakest lawsuit ever? This guy's got to be completely
Hello, everyone. My name is One Peg, and today's
it's that video.
Look at the suit that is that a person working for Nexon as the head of the development studio overseeing a team of 20 for Project P3 had been working on this project from home. Now, this project that had been getting worked on from home was being worked on at their home office if it was okay to continue using his personal servers. The leaders told him to refrain from using the personal server. Mr. Choi, not with Nexon, and use them along with Mr. Park and IronMace in the development of the counterfeit game Dark&Darker. Moreover, as the founder of IronMace and former P3 project team member, Mr. Park knew or should have known that Mr. Choi illegally stole Nexon's trade secrets and copyrighted materials to develop Dark&Darker. Mr. Park and IronMace thus have knowingly benefited from Mr. Choi's misappropriation and will continue to do so since Dark&Darker is made commercially available. Therefore, the DMCA strike must take place, is basically how the rest of this goes, and then there is proof therein. So the timeline, again, is Mr. Choi was fired, then recruited a bunch of people to come and work at Dark&Darker and used the assets.
Well, the timeline isn't he was fired. The timeline is that there are a bunch of stuff happened that led to him getting fired, which is pretty critical. I don't know why you're skipping that.
That he had stolen from Nexon to build Dark and Darker's game. Now remember, they're saying that all of this stuff, the files and whatnot that they list in their exhibits, are stolen property from Nexon. Stolen. Now let's talk about the timeline that IronMace states. The accused member decided to leave Nexon in June 2021 due to a breakdown of trust with one of his superiors and due to the uncertain atmosphere at the company. His prior project was unceremoniously canceled after a well-received milestone presentation in 2020, and numerous other projects around him were also canceled during this time. This is a completely different timeline psychologically. Remember, Nexon says that they scrapped the project after they found the data breach. IronMace and Mr. Choi are saying a completely different one. IronMace and Mr. Choi are saying that the project got scrapped. Mr. Choi decided that he was going to leave to pursue this idea that he thought had legs, and in doing so, talked to his coworkers about leaving the company.
Didn't the suit say that he got fired in July, early July, after they found all of the bullshit? And here it says that he decided to leave in June. I don't see how that's a different timeline at all. Isn't that exactly the same timeline?
Then you have the folks over at Nexon, the superiors at Nexon, getting wind of this and terminating him, citing that he stole assets. And I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of corporate jobs in my career, working at different financial firms when I was a financial planner for a little more than 11 years, and came across multiple instances of people that if they even got so much as a sniff of you leaving the company to work for a competitor, they would tell you instantly to pack up all of your stuff and leave. No 2-week notice, no questioning of whether or not you were going to stay, no searching out whether or not any of this stuff was valid. People in those industries.
This guy's
competitive industries
running defense hard, dude.
And they will just terminate you on the spot. Take your suitcase and get out.
Yeah, but so that's not
completely believable to me. Shortly after Nexon's leadership became aware of the accused member's plans to leave the company, instead of trying to resolve it in a professional manner, they abruptly sent the internal audit team and accused him of stealing files, despite having observed his personal server being used without notice for several months. Due to harassment and the lack of respect from the company, and after consulting with his lawyers, he concluded that his private information on his private server.
Okay, can we talk for a second about this guy's Discord? What in the fuck is this, dude? Make Discord groups, please. Holy shit. What a nightmare. Amogus? Here, look at my Discord for a comparison. Look at this. That's it. Look at how clean that shit is. I bet this guy has like a desktop with 16,000 WordPads on it. Actually, I have that. Well, not that many, but...
servers wasn't subject to any record, so he deleted his information to ensure his privacy.
Oh, this is really
Nexon
quiet,
thought
my
that
bad.
the assets were stolen, but just to make sure that everything was on the up and up, Mr. Choi deleted everything off of his own personal computing devices to make sure that there would be no evidence of wrongdoing whatsoever, which I think is pretty noble, as long as that's true. It makes sense to make...
It's noble to destroy evidence? Dude, if you know that they're accusing you of doing that, how is it noble to destroy the evidence to make sure that now you can't protect yourself anymore and show that it wasn't the case? Wait, is he really saying like destroying the evidence was a positive thing? Because now it definitely means that he definitely doesn't have the files? Like he couldn't make a copy before that? He can't be saying this. This guy can't be serious. What?
At different financial firms when I was a financial the of this stuff was valid. People in those industries were being used without notice for several months. Due to harassment and the lack of respect from the company, and after consulting with his lawyers, he concluded that his private information on his private servers wasn't subject to any record, so he deleted his information to ensure his privacy. Nexon thought that the assets were stolen, but just to make sure that everything was on the up and up, Mr. Choi deleted everything off of his own personal computing devices to make sure that there would be no evidence of wrongdoing whatsoever, which I think is pretty noble, as long as that's true. It makes sense to make sure that there would be no record of any wrongdoing in those cases. You're telling me that I was allowed to work from home. I'm not allowed to work from home anymore. I did for 3 months. My bad. If you're going to sue me over that, that's my fault. but I don't want to rope anybody that I've been working with in on this if we decide to go along and make a game that is somewhat similar in genre. And in doing so, I want to make sure that I'm completely clean and the company that I'm working with is completely clean, so I'm going to delete everything that I have on my end. He was fired based on these unproven claims and subsequently sued by the company a month later.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to go to like an auto repair shop to get my skull like dented out because my brain just concaved and imploded on himself. Did that guy just really say those sentences he just said? How did that make any sense? Like if this guy like 3 gold medals in mental gymnastics, holy shit! Mind is blown.
With liens placed on his home
blew
and
my
other
mind.
assets. His personal lawsuit is still ongoing, and the claims of stealing and misappropriating these files have not been substantiated.
Also, who are these guys' lawyers? These guys are suing me and saying that I stole their code. And these lawyers are like, oh, here's what you should do. You know, you should just delete all the files and just tell them that you lost everything and that you deleted everything, and then they'll be cool with it. Trust, I'm a lawyer. Is his lawyer like his fucking like cousin's son who's like a paralegal who's like 1 month out of fucking law school is like, trust me, I'm a lawyer? There's no way this makes sense to anyone, or that any lawyer said like, this is a good idea. Yeah, this is like, was the guy like Danny DeVito pretending to be a lawyer? There's no shot.
Fully cooperative with the investigation from police and has been the target of multiple search warrants. IronMace has also been the subject of multiple search warrants during the investigation and has been accommodating as possible to speed up this process and prove no wrongdoing. The fact that 9 of the 20-plus P3 project team members voluntarily left Nexon out of their own free will to join IronMace, despite the inherent risks of joining a startup, shows the trust that the accused member instills in his peers. I mean, there is some truth to that if you think about it. 9 other guys decided that they were going to leave the project and join this startup that was already being horribly scrutinized for months, and they still came. I mean, it's one thing if you say that...
Yeah, that's actually really... That is true. That is a huge risk for them. The only reason that wouldn't be a huge risk for them is if they knew, because the guy told them that he had the original files and that they could just make the game immediately because they already had everything and there would actually be no risk because the game's already done. That would be like... But, you know, there's... That would be like a wild thing to think about. There's no way that's what it's actually happening, right?
But to say that 9 other people that didn't go along with the thief originally but then decided to, I don't know, man. If it were me and I figured that they had a leg to stand on, I probably wouldn't have put myself in jeopardy, you know? Some of the rest of this almost reads ridiculous, if I'm being honest. To investigate, Nexon conducted a comparative analysis of Dark&Darker and the P3 game. First, a preliminary analysis revealed that the resource file names of 2,338 files were identical between the 2 games. Now remember this. There's some numbers here. 2,000...
That could be a lot, but if there's like 2 million files in a game, then that doesn't really matter. But if there's like 10,000, that's a lot.
338 files they found were direct copies, at least in file name. Even if one takes into account that both games were developed using the same program, example Unreal Engine, the number of identical file names is too substantial for mere coincidence. For your reference, the comparison of the file names is appended hereto as Exhibit D. They didn't say how many of the files were part of Unreal Engine. That's over 1,300 of the 2,338 files. 1,300, more than half. As their first number, 2,338 files, more than half were part of Unreal Engine's core architecture that is needed to be able to just use Unreal Engine. Second, the character designs and other settings and structural designs of Dark&Darker are suspiciously similar to those of P3 game. Both games.
But both the claim and both your defense are horribly missing the context. What is the total amount of files? Is the total amount of files like 5,000 or is it 5 million? Because that's enough context. It's not just like, were they Unreal resources? Because it also means that they used exactly the same 1,300 Unreal resources. How many Unreal resources are there? Are there 1,500 of those, or are there 25,000 of those, and did they use exactly the same 1,300? Because if they did, that's actually another argument against it, rather than for it, like you're saying.
This is the part that I love. Both games showcase the same character class. Barbarian, Cleric, Fighter, Wizard, Rogue, and Ranger.
That's
Furthermore,
literally
just as the
every
P3
fantasy
takes
game
place in
ever.
a
But
dungeon with dark brick walls, which is intended to portray a dark and fearful atmosphere, and introduces torch-related game features, which allow users to light up or extinguish the torches installed in the dungeons.
Is
to
this
increase
Darkest
or
Dungeon?
decrease visibility. Dark and Darker takes place in the same brick-walled dungeon setting with the same torch-related game features. It is no coincidence that the characters and setting of the games are aesthetically so similar. It is clear that
oh, I can see what's happening here. Okay, this is lawyers writing it for fucking normies, for people who are going to have to be on a jury, or for legal people so that they can understand what the hell's going on. And this is going to be gamers nitpicking it and being like, this is what every video game looks like. That's not enough. And you have like fucking normies versus gamers going on. And the gamers see it as like, see, they don't have a case, but they're because other games have torches. But the text is made for fucking normies to understand why it's so similar and what's going on there. That's why what I really said is you just need gameplay of both of the games side by side. And if you're an actual gamer and you see that, you should be honestly being able to say like, okay, this is like very clearly derivative of that, or like this is insanely similar. Or you could be like, no, this is pretty different. And you could get a consensus from gamers very quickly on that. If you're looking at like text and how it's written for legal people to understand what's going on, to have like buzzwords and keywords like torches and whatever, as a gamer you can think off the top of your head, you can think of 15 games that had torches in it and be like, just because games have torches and there's light, you know, like a Darkest Dungeon and stuff, or like, oh, this other game also has dark in the title, oh, obviously that doesn't mean that it's a copy. And then your brain starts going in like a whole bunch of different directions.
Iron Mace used Nexon's data to create the characters and setting in Dark and Darker. Even if, as Iron Mace has argued in media statements, the graphic assets, including character designs, were purchased from the Unreal Marketplace. It does not explain the numerous specific aspects of the characters in Dark and Darker's characters that are different from that of the graphic assets available for purchase in the Unreal Marketplace, but are identical to the aspects of the characters found in the P3 game. The comparison of characters and setting structural designs between Dark and Darker and the P3 game is appended hereto as Exhibit E. So let's take a look at Exhibits D and E. Oh, and really quickly, by the way, they list a number of copyrights that were filed in the U.S. office. Now, Dark and Darker has been was being worked on since November of 2021. Since then, it has had, 4 public playtests now, with a 5th one that was slated to be in early April. In that time, the most successful playtest that we saw was the second to last playtest that they had, which had 1 million unique accounts, and this last one that they had toward the middle of February that had 2 million unique accounts. Since then, since those playtests took place, Nexon decided that they were going to file a copyright for a whole bunch of assets, the game's code, as well as certain pieces of art that were generated. And you can see here that we have the effective dates of the registration as February 9th of 2023, with the registration decision being approved on March 3rd. It is March 26th. So you're telling me that in all of this time, Nexon's Project P3 that had been generating whatever it had been generating, saying that this was something that was proprietary to Nexon, owned by Nexon, that at no point between when they filed lawsuits and saw all of this going through, at no point did they decide to file for copyright until early 2023 after they saw Dark and Darker start gaining traction? Interesting. So here is the list of files from Exhibit D. Now remember, this says that it's more than 1,000 files having the same file names as Dark and Darker. This is their big smoking gun. Below is the list of resource file names that are identical in Dark and Darker and the P3 game. They're not going into source code. At no point do they mention that anything in here has anything to do with source code or that they found evidence of them having used the source code, but instead they list 1,000 different files of assets. As we scroll through, you can see that is a pretty extensive list. But here's the thing. If you look real close, some of this looks interesting. WY's Icon 16, WY's Icon 512, WY's.U plugin. For those of you that don't know, a program like WY's is a plugin that you can use for multiple game engines for spatial audio. WY's is a very, very common spatial audio plugin that a lot of developers use in their video games. You see the logo splash on the intro screens for an awful lot of games. A lot of them. Iron Mace responded with a Google document spreadsheet showing every single one of the files that Nexon says are the carbon copy of something that was theirs, was proprietary, and is therefore in violation of copyright, with links to where they can be found. Unreal Engine Marketplace. This is a free plugin that you can get from Dmitry Karpukhin, located on his website, dmitrykarpukhin.com. The Blockout Tools plugin is something that anyone can add to Unreal. In addition, it goes down and shows additional links. Unreal Engine Marketplace for the Fantasy Dungeon. What does the Fantasy Dungeon look like? Huh, now that looks awful similar. Those torches look really similar, don't they? So you're going to say that a game that was created using files that were stolen from you were the vast majority of, in fact, they go on to say that 950 of the 1,038 files that are listed in this claim were from the Unreal.
Yeah, this is why I was saying in the beginning, like, you can have a whole bunch of asset pictures and art pictures and stuff. You know, you can have, what did I say, garnet ores, or you can have torches in video games. I think that doesn't really say much. But if you have build files and you have game mechanic ideas and you have balancing and game progress, if that kind of stuff is similar, and that's why I'm saying like you need gameplay and playthrough to let actual gamers do that. You can show a picture of like, this is what P3 was going to look like and this is what the other thing was going to look like, and they're both using Unreal assets, and then a jury or whatever, or like a judge or whatever that goes through can look at that, and then like a normie is going to say like, oh, that looks similar. But as a gamer, you need a different lens to see that through, because that's not enough. And I feel like they're kind of insulting the intelligence of the gamers here by pretending like, oh, this is what they're talking to normies about. This is clearly the only case they have. And as gamers, you guys, you guys know, that's not enough, right, guys? And then instead of getting to instead of speaking on the level and on the resources that you need to speak on, this guy feels insanely biased. Okay, let's go back to the other video.
Game is the same. It's an identical idea.
Let's speed this guy
Again,
up
people are going to get
this
it twisted here, and they're going to think, oh, you can't, Wizards of the Coast are going to be coming after Nexon next.
Don't get it twisted.
That's not what anybody's fucking saying. Please don't make me read that comment ever again. Both games set in a player versus player environment, PvPvE. This means the players battle each other. We all know what that means. Both games are first-person shooter FPS. Yeah, you're in first person. We know what that means. Both games have role-playing game elements, RPG. Yeah, we all know what that means. Both games are in a medieval setting inspired by the classic board game Dungeons & Dragons. While Nexon does not claim to own the idea of PvPvE, FPS, RPG, game inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, it does own the copyright in the particular expression of the idea embodied in the P3 audiovisual copyrights. This is the point that's lost on people, and it's so easy to understand. They're not saying they own any of these things. They're not even saying they own the combination of any of these things. They're saying their copyright is a combination of these things in this exact way, with these exact mechanics, with these exact audiovisual elements, because it's the same fucking game. Because it's not fully explainable to list all the similarities in a two-dimensional legal pleading, they then are going to go over some examples. This is, in my opinion, if you take it as an isolated point, probably the weakest point in this entire document. They say, in the core edition of Dungeons & Dragons, players can choose from 12 classes, and then they go through them. Barb, Bard, Warlock, Wizard, etc., etc. D&D also has additional classes beyond the core 12.
Barb?
In P3, players can choose from 1 of 6. Cleric, Ranger, Barbarian, Tanker or Fighter, Thief or Rogue, and Wizard. In Dark&Darker, you can also choose from 6. Cleric, Ranger, Barbarian, Fighter, Rogue, Wizard. Same 6. There's nothing inherent to Dungeons & Dragons inspired video games that would compel a developer to select precisely the same 6 character classes that P3 selected. True, you are right. Indeed, there are more than 900 unique combinations of 6 character classes that a game developer could select from a set of 12. When one considers that a game developer is not limited to choosing exactly 6 classes, but could also choose 1, or 14, or any number in between, that results in thousands upon thousands of alternative choices. So they're arguing here, why did we choose 6 and this specific 6, and why did they choose 6 and this specific 6? They could have chose any flavour of the rainbow, but they chose the exact flavour that was developed at Nexon, that was our game. Then they just go over examples of all the games that have, certain character archetypes that share with Dungeons & Dragons, but they don't have the exact same ones, because obviously they're different games, developed by different people. Nexon's choice of the 6 character classes in P3 was a creative choice, similar to the choice a screenwriter makes when deciding the main character to include in a film. Defendants copied Nexon's creative choice wholesale. This is one point, as an overall. Of course, if you make just that point, you can argue a million different reasons as to why this is a coincidence, right? But obviously they...
Well, I'm sorry to have to go back to it, but I can't believe that other guy was like, oh... he wanted to make sure that there was no... He even said he wanted to make sure that there was no evidence of wrongdoing. So that was kind of noble on his side to just delete all the... I still can't understand that he said that sentence and thinks that he made like a good point in the defense. My brain is still rattled. I'm going to be mulling that over for like a day or two. How is that possible?
Again, I think this is not the greatest point in the world. I'm going to have to turn this off. Oh no, it's light mode. Oh, I don't look at it for too long, so I'm just going to skip over this. But basically, they argue why the concept of the
dweller.
is the same. Viking man, barbarian.
Yes, light mode, my man.
The original source for being a barbarian. Why does the cleric look so similar compared to the cleric of Dungeons & Dragons, the original source? Why does the fighter look so similar? Again, same shit. Why does the wizard look so similar? Again, same shit. Why does the rogue look so similar? Same. Why does the ranger look so similar? Oh god, thank god we're back to dark mode. To make its expression of the 6 standard character classes unique, Nexon gave the character classes a unique skill not shared by any other character.
Tell me you're a vampire locked in a basement who hates sunlight without saying it. Jesus.
For example, the barbarian in P3
oh no, light mode
with his axe. No other character in P3 has the ability to break down doors. The ranger in P3 can set traps to injure his enemies. No other character in P3 has this ability. The thief/rogue in P3 has the ability to pick lock chests without a lockpick. No other character in P3 has this ability. Dark&Darker copied these expressive elements wholesale. In Dark&Darker, only the barb can break down doors. Only the ranger can set traps. Only the rogue can pick locks. Now again, people are gonna look
again like see this is more specific. But the other guy was talking about like, oh, they had torches. There was light and darkness. Like, he's trying to go fucking so surface level so that you could be on his side. You just need more gameplay details and more gameplay elements. You just need to let people play through it a little bit.
look at the totality of the design that they're breaking down and understand this continues on because the game is fundamentally, substantially the same game. This is not about, oh, just because a fighter wears a helmet doesn't mean they're the same game and they stole the idea. This is, if you look at everything, I don't see any world in which somebody can intake all of this and be like, nah, they've got no point at all. IronMace's in the complete right here. I don't know how you can get there, but hopefully if you are a skeptic, you're still with me because there's more. These elements are unique to P3. There's no existing trope in Dungeons & Dragons or video games that only a barbarian can break doors, only rangers can set traps, and only thieves and rogues can pick locks. Those unique aspects of P3 characters and defendants unimaginatively copied in Dark and Darker. Selection of Unreal Engine marketplace assets. This was the most brain rot opinion that I saw on the entire internet. People literally read the DMCA, or maybe didn't even read, just somebody else said something, and then they were like, yeah, that sounds stupid, you're absolutely right, Nexon is dumb as fuck, and they're just reaching and they're lying. What people saw was Nexon said, there's 2,000 files here that we essentially got access to from downloading the game, and we...
Wait, this is a new thing. We never heard of this before. Let's see what he says about this.
Opened it and we saw all the file names that had been downloaded onto our computer, and they share the same name as 2,000 files that we have for our game P3 that these developers just happened to work on previously. And obviously IronMace came out and said, you know, mic drop moment, all of these are Unreal Marketplace assets, so you're dumb, haha. Everyone laugh at the dumb corporate man who's saying that they own the copyright to Unreal Engine assets. Nobody ever made that point. Nobody ever made that point. That was not a point anyone ever made. The point they're making, P3 is their copyrighted game that they were making, and these people remade P3 at a different studio because they could only make the game as close to P3 because they had access to files they shouldn't have had access to, and because they worked on the game. So therefore they left one company and made the exact game. Now follow me here with this logic. Right, if somebody gave you a picture of a game or a 1-minute gameplay of a game and had 100 game development studios in a room and said, right, all 100 of you studios remake that game. You've got 10 months to do it. How many of those studios would buy the exact same asset packs in combination to make it so that all of their files or a substantial portion of their files matched up exactly to the original game? It would not be all of them. Now, what about when you add in art? What about when you add in game design, actual things that happen in the game that happen in the identical way, which we're going to go through in a minute because they do come up. That's the point they're making. They're not saying that they own the copyright for files that are sold on the Unreal Engine Marketplace. They're saying, in totality, outside of an isolated incident, outside of a vacuum, in totality of the game's production, the fact that they bought all of the same assets and put the assets together in the exact same way means that they built the game, P3, with the name Dark and Darker. That's what they're saying. Anyone who's engaging with reality can see that that's what they're saying. If you've not read any of the documentation, if you're not engaged with any of this whatsoever, and you've just heard other people say differently, please stop repeating just uninformed, terrible information, because you doing so is not helping IronMace. Having everybody so uninformed on the actual topic is not going to help them win the case. You're not going to win this one on PR. Especially when the PR is it's just so silly. I think the best thing you can do for IronMace and for Dark and Darker, if you're a concerned fan, is to engage with all the reality of the case and then go into it with your eyes open, not just cope on some literal nonsense lies that just don't exist. And they explain this here. If a game wanted a 3D werewolf character, they could spend the time and resources to make one, or they could go to the Unreal Engine Marketplace and buy one. They can then use it as the werewolf as is, off the shelf, or they can modify and customize it. Many other assets can be purchased, including 3D models, and then they go through examples of other things you can buy. We all know Unreal Engine.
Yeah, that's something I mentioned before. I don't know if that's a thing, but would it be possible that they have the original asset, but then they alter it afterwards, but they just do like... I did this on my computer, like save as, and I just save it as the same name, but it ends up like I'll have like a paint.net thing, and I'll open something that exists, but I'll alter it, but I'll just save it as the same file name. Like, is it possible that it's the same file name, but it's like a completely altered, completely edited version of the original same file? Isn't that also possible? I don't even know if that's possible.
Cool place. Amazing. Nexon was required to use creativity to select the assets that best express this idea for P3. Defendants copied this creative selection. Indeed, Nexon conducted a comparison of the file names underlying P3 and Dark and Darker and discovered the games have 2,000...
You know, it comes out to like, well, we had like 2 songs, and like our reason that the one song is copied of the other one is because in like 863 instances, the exact same note is played on the exact same time. And the other people are like, huh, don't they know that there were only 7 notes? So don't they know that that's like obviously always going to happen? What idiots. This is like both sides of the argument. It's like,
embodying asset purchase from the Unreal Engine Marketplace. As a result of defendants' unimaginative copying of Nexon's selection of Unreal Engine Marketplace assets, the game has a strikingly similar appearance. The examples discussed below are illustrative, but not exhaustive. In gaming, non-player characters, NPCs, unfortunately, what a lot of the people engaging with this story displaying the characteristics of, is a character controlled by the computer rather than a human player. Both P3 and Dark and Darker feature scary monster NPCs that attack human-controlled characters. A developer using the Unreal Engine Marketplace has an unfathomably large selection of pre-existing monsters from which to choose. Instead of selecting a unique set of monsters for Dark and Darker, defendants largely copied the choices Nexon made in P3. Zombie, skeleton wizard, mimic, wraith, cave troll. These are all the same assets. Now, Nexon's about to drop that fucking hammer with his statement, because when I read this, I was just like, lawyers are smart people, and there was such a concise manner to say this, and I've just failed to do it.
Except the lawyer that was advising Choi and whatever the other guy, Terrence something, because that guy, barely a paralegal. It's noble to delete your criminal footprint. What?
In their public statements, defendants contested that it was fine for defendants to steal Nexon's selection of assets because each individual asset is, by itself, owned by the Unreal Engine marketplace. This was the opinion of the masses. Lol. IronMace just fucking own Nexon because they said, you don't own assets, we bought the assets, what are you talking about? Defendants' contention is contrary to the Copyright Act, which protects, quote, a work formed by the collection and assembling of pre-existing materials or of data that are selected, coordinated, or arranged in such a way that the resulting work as a whole constitutes an original work of authorship. This is the literal Copyright Act. What they're copyrighting is not the assets, it's the collection and the totality of the work arranged and coordinated in this exact manner. That is their point, not that they own the asset.
I don't even know that if there was anyone that really said like they own the assets. I feel like that might be a little bit of a straw man, or that might be the argument of like a 14-year-old. I think what people were saying is like they had a whole bunch of files in common, but it's normal that they did because they're Unreal assets. So that's always going to happen because it's a 3D game and it's developed in Unreal Engine. So you're going to have a lot of assets in common. But yeah, of course, the problem I think is like what percentage of the assets do you have in common, and is it exactly the same? Like, what is a normal, you know, if you pick two games in like the same genre with like a similar vibe, how many assets are gonna have in common? Like, what's the percentage there, and what's the percentage here? Because if the average or the median, whatever, is like anywhere from like, I don't know, like 8 to 9% or something, if it's in the same vibe, if in the same atmosphere, and these two games have like 65%, then you should be honest and be like, okay, that's pretty fucking sus, especially given the fact that, you know, the guy just, all of the server stuff and the way that he exited the company, quote unquote, robbed, like took half of the development team with him because he thought the program was going to get axed, and basically made it so that it would get axed by taking half of the development team with him, you know.
That's individually. The Copyright Act's position is sensible. Defendants' position is not. If defendants were correct, any developer who purchased assets from the Unreal Engine marketplace would have no protection for the overall look and feel of their games. True and real. No matter how creative a developer's selection of assets, the selection could be copied at will by any other developer. Works of enormous creativity would be left unprotected by copyright simply because the building blocks of the work came from the Unreal Engine marketplace. Then nobody would use it. Like, no big companies would ever use assets. The law does not treat other creative works in this manner. English language books are protected by copyright, even though they are built from the same 26 letters of the alphabet owned by nobody.
Exactly.
Because again, it's the building blocks that build.
It's like the music example that I give, even like more reduced, you know, to its essence. But like words, yeah, you can't like say, well, these words are the same words
into the idea is
because they were English, you know.
The idea, how it's put together, how it's built, that is...
Music is the next example I see.
Most of Western music is built by arranging 12 notes owned by nobody, but songwriters...
Well, yeah, 12, sorry, because you've got the...
This is the most common sense point of them all, with a great 2 examples. The Copyright Act does not provide for any lesser protection to video games. Yeah, it's not written in there. It doesn't say Unreal Engine assets, you can steal somebody's game. In addition to copying the player characters and NPCs, defendants also copy the visual appearance of the game settings. For example, Nexon selected the door below from the Unreal Engine marketplace, but customized it by making it wider than the stock door. Defendants selected exactly the same door as Nexon for Dark&Darker and, or on Information and Belief, widened it in the same manner. So the example they're making here again, they got an asset, and not only did they have the asset, is they modified it, and then Dark&Darker modified it in the same way. And as you can see here, P3 placed it in a campfire.
Okay, I think that even if you're trying to be objective, and again, I have no dog in this fight, I don't give a shit, but like the fact that you take the same asset and then you change it in exactly the same way, like the main argument there is that it's probably done by the same person who worked on the other game as well, and if they have some kind of NDA or something, like if they don't own those files, they can't just recreate exactly the same thing they worked on. Like, it's a creative thing, right? It's not like you can't be a game dev, but you can't be a game dev and make the exact same game that you made for another company that you signed away to them and is their IP, and then just yoink it and just remake it, right? Like, if you're allowed to do that, then nothing has any value, and everyone's just like, you know what's going to happen? Everyone's going to rush every game. Every game is going to be released as quick as possible because otherwise people are going to steal it, and it's going to be shit. It's not going to work properly, and then people are going to steal it because it's out and they can just copy it, and every game is just going to become shit, even more than it already is.
To congregate with other players to replenish their health. In Dark&Darker, you sit in a campfire in the exact
Can you
same
check?
way.
Look at light mode. I can't see
it. Takes place in a unique yellow orange light.
I can't see an antimatter, bro. I don't know what kind of fucking night vision goggles he's got on, but I can't see what the fuck this is. This is like a fucking blue blob. use light mode.
Edition taking months of trial and error to perfect. Choosing this lighting required more than the minimal level of creativity to be protected as authorship. Dark&Darker chose precisely the same lighting. Again, weak point on its own, but in
Thank
totality,
you.
a point that goes in with
No,
with everything
do it
else.
back.
One of the main themes in P3 is the juxtaposition of light and dark. Thus, P3 will introduce torch-related game features that allow players to illuminate or extinguish the torches installed in the dungeon to increase or decrease visibility. Dark&Darker also includes the torch-related game feature that allows the players to turn on, turn off the torches. In both games, the outline of the torch lights up in yellow when the function is activated.
Code is about reusing assets for sure, but if you, a lot of you guys work in IT and stuff, right? If you go into a lot of it, okay, this is how I understand it. If you work as like a full stack developer or something, and you're trying to make something, you look at like what is the question from the, okay, this is going to be like my completely, I don't know anything about computer science, and it's going to possibly sound completely horrible, okay? You talk to the person who wants something made, what do they want made, based on what they want made and how they want to work around it. You find what is it architecture and which coding language would fit that best, and then within that you get your fucking framework done, whatever, and then you fucking go to, what is it, GitHub or some kind of repo, and you basically just yoink whatever looks like it can do roughly what you want to do. You plop it in, you see if it works, and then you adjust it to the demands until it works, and then you take something else and then you plop it in, right? But once you, like, let's say that you work for a company and you do that, and you, instead of doing that, you make completely from scratch a completely new product. You can't like get yourself fired and then start a new company and then remake exactly the same thing when you've legally signed over the existence of that thing and you haven't created that specific thing to that company that you work for. I mean, this goes back into like, does that fall under like non-compete and stuff? But it's very different from, you can have your experience as a developer and apply that to a different project versus you're a developer now that is remaking the exact same product that you've already made for someone else and that is their property, right? These are two different things.
When developing P3, Nexon developed distinctive forms of action and movement that extended the minimal level of creativity required for a work of authorship. For example, in P3,
I know how to write div icon front end.
Reaching for the lid, you know, hit the lid. Oh, we're going to open the treasure chest.
Here come the developer jokes in the chat that I have no idea what's going on.
Terrible example. I'm sorry.
Company can own the library? No.
Distinctive circular motion over the chest without physically touching the chest. Similarly, characters in P3 can bandage their wounds by using a distinctive circular hand motion, as depicted in the snapshots below. Defendants copy the same motions in Dark&Darker. As you can see, doing the same things because they're the same game. P3 also contains a stealth mode where players can hide from other players in their environment. While the idea of stealth mode is not unique to P3, it uniquely.
If I build a financial model for a company, then go to another company, I can re-implement the same model. Maybe. I think that depends on your contract that you have with that first company. If that's something that you develop with a team and you're like under NDA and you're that's like a product that they buy off you and that they then own to use, and they have a copyright for it, then you can't do that anymore, right? I guess copyright law just comes into it at that time. Sorry, I missed like the last part. Hang on, what is he saying?
Along with everything else. One of the main themes in P3 is the juxtaposition of light and dark. Thus, P3 will introduce torch-related game features that allow players to illuminate or extinguish the torch.
Oh, we're at the torch part now.
Decrease visibility. Dark&Darker also includes the torch-related game feature that allows the players to turn on, turn off the torches. In both games, the outline of the torch lights up in yellow when the function is activated. When developing P3, Nexon developed distinctive forms of action and movement that extended the minimal level of creativity required for a work of authorship. For example, in P3, players can open treasure chests. In most of the games in real life, the action would consist of reaching for the lid, you know, hit the lid. Oh, we're going to open the treasure chest, right? Terrible example. I'm sorry. In P3, however, characters move their hands in a distinctive circular motion over the chest without physically touching the chest. Similarly, characters in P3 can bandage their wounds by using a distinctive circular hand motion, as depicted in the snapshots below. Defendants copy the same motions in Dark&Darker. As you can see, doing the same things because they're the same game. P3 also contains a stealth mode.
Okay, he is biased though.
It uniquely expresses it by turning the gameplay screen in grayscale as depicted below. As you can see, same shit. Now, grayscale in stealth is in games just like this is in games just like this.
Yeah.
Is in, all of these things have been in games before. They're not arguing that they own the right to expression of any one of these things. They're saying in totality, how could you?
It's not like there is this, you know, like this is also a video game, but like if you have, there's got to be a limit. Like you have 16,000 things in common that are like all exactly the same. Plus your dude yoinked the fucking source code and deleted everything out of the goodness of his heart, deleted the trail so that they couldn't track it where it went. Like, it's looking pretty bad.
When we know you provably worked there, you provably took the files, you provably would not hand over the server to prove you didn't do these things. Like, I'm not sure how many more things you could provably do before people just go, yeah, you've got a point there, right? Whether it's legally actionable, again, not my fight. Then they talk about, of course, the buffs or shields. One example is the buff bubble,
Buffs.
created in a way unique to P3. When the buff bubble is activated, the character is encapsulated in a sheer protective red bubble. With
Like
a
the
Dark
buffs.
and Darker did the same, but it's blue. In both games, there are potions that provide restorative powers. In P3, the potion flask lights up and is fastened to the character's waist, while restorative potions are a common feature in dungeon crawl games. The light up feature and the placement of the flask are unique to P3. Moreover, return to the theme of light and darkness in P3, Nexon's developers consciously added the light up feature which illuminates the surrounding setting. Defendants copied this, so as you can see, same shit. Narrative elements.
And the defenders are going to have their work cut out for them of like, for every single example that plaintiffs that they rise, you're going to have like 1 or 2 other games that also do the other thing. But then even when you have that, they're going to say like, okay, you've got like, 5 games that do one thing the same, but how many games do as many things the same? And it's always going to be 0. And that's going to be the whole case, right?
Several unique elements to immerse the player in the unique world. For example, players in P3 can immerse the game in a tavern. Players in a tavern can communicate with each other. They may also use their weapons on each other for fun, but weapons do not actually inflict damage in the tavern or otherwise affect the game. Once players form a party in the tavern, they
Again, now we're at those details in the things where it's like they have to write all of these things down for completion, but a average gamer brain person is going to be like, so many games have a tavern, so many games have a flask, so many games have, and it's going to be really hard for people, especially if they have some kind of bias, to not take this one way or the other. This is just like the legal mumbo jumbo that they have to write in there to support their case, right?
Intense gameplay begins. The tavern is a unique feature of P3. Defendants copy the tavern. They call it the Gathering Call, though it is the same narrative purpose.
The games look more similar than StarCraft and Brood War.
In Dark and Darker, players can rest and restore their health while sitting by a campfire in identical poses. Both P3 and Dark and Darker take the players through a similarly structured dungeon basement. Specifically, P3 team built a 5-level dungeon that is an inverted pyramid structure. Unlike cryptocurrency, that is a pyramid structure. On information belief, I can't help myself. The multi-level inverted pyramid structure dungeon is replicated in Dark and Darker. Defendants have announced that the first level of the dungeon will be revealed in the 5th playtest, which just came out. They released it on a torrent. They even changed the game, so you're no longer in a tavern at the beginning. Why would you be doing that? Why would you now be in a forest solo? Is it something to do with the coding of the game that was done through Steam, and they had to, jerry-rig this feature to circumvent basically that they're releasing it without Steam's multiplayer services? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it's because they're trying to, change the game a little bit to make this seem less bad. The P3 team thought long and hard about how they could, build a dungeon basically. They decided to have a spatial control feature in P3 in the form of poison fog that would guide the players to a certain location of the dungeon where the other players are located. IronMace implemented the same spatial feature control renamed Dark Swarm that forces players to a certain location in the dungeon in Dark and Darker. Finally, the premise of both the games involve a premise where adventurers hear a rumor that they may find riches and form a quest party to embark on an adventure into the dungeon filled with monsters and treasures. And then they go through the descriptions of the game, which again are incredibly similar.
That's like every fantasy D&D type B game, right? So again, it's gonna have to come down to like a quantity of the things that's so close that even a complete outsider person is gonna be like, that looks like it's exactly the same. Because in the end, I don't know to which extent it's going to be, if the opinion is going to be more of a slightly normie person who just sees these games and is like, oh, I can't really see the difference between those, so I'll just get this one. Because every time that happens, they've effectively stolen the customer, right? Like it can also be less of on paper what is exactly copied, but it can be more like what is the outcome eventually at the end when someone decides what product are they going to buy. If they don't see a significant difference and therefore just buy whatever, maybe they can make their game like 2 cents cheaper, or they can put it slightly higher on the list of Steam and therefore just, take all their sales because it's so similar. Or they can release it earlier and therefore get all the people to buy it, right? That's going to be like a really big argument as well. But I don't know if they can take that angle. It doesn't look like it.
Nexon paid to develop by Nexon. The rest of this is going through why they're bringing this in Washington, specifically in the United States. Again, it's because Steam, it's because they're using AWS servers. Both of these companies have agreements that say if you're using these servers or services, then you agree to have litigation brought in the US. And then they go over also why the majority of the player base is in the US. 38.67% is based in the United States, and how they've ran promotional campaigns in the United States and how they direct all of their communication to the United States. And then what do they want? What are their claims for relief? Well, they claim that it's put forward in a manner of the law in the court that all these things are true, that they're the owner of the trade secrets and all that good stuff. So due to all these things that they claim, that Nexon are suffering harm, that they've done this, knowingly, Nexon is entitled to 1, preliminary and permanent injunctive relief, an award for damages for actual losses, an award of damages for unjust enrichment, a reasonable royalty, exemplary damages in an amount of 2 times the damages awarded, and an award of its attorney's fees. Then, of course, they do the same for the copyright infringement. The first one was for trade secrets. And what exactly are they talking about here? They're talking about preliminary and permanently enjoining defenders, their officers, employees, agents, subsidiaries, representatives, distributors, dealers, members, affiliates, internet service providers, and all persons acting in concert or participation with them from misappropriating plaintiffs' P3 and infringing plaintiffs' copyright works, including by copying, marketing, distributing, or publicly performing Dark and Darker or any game substantially similar to the P3 game. They have to deliver all of the materials back to Nexon. They have to give them money and all of these things. Now, what could this mean? Well, now that it's over, I'll Never Be Sober. Great song. Now, that was a lot to go through. What do I think is going to happen? I obviously am of the opinion that this is way too much to ignore and that IronMace are definitely in the wrong. Are they legally going to be actionable claims? I don't know. I think they should be, probably. If what Nexon are saying are true, and again, a lot of these things are so easily provable, then I think Nexon have a very strong case, and it's also a very important case. And I know a lot of people in the industry think that this is the case as well, because a lot of things when it comes to copyright is looking at, is something a market replacement? Is it a market substitute for the original body of work, essentially?
Okay, he's mentioning it now, yeah, what I was saying. Like, is it going to be a replacement? Is it going to look similar enough that people can just mistake it, and as a result, you can just make a bunch of money off of... It's basically like, is it a Chinese knockoff, right? And then, like, if it is, and a lot of people will just see it as a replacement, you're just robbing them. And if you're making that within a region of the world where that's the kind of stuff is protected, then it's the right to call that out.
And Nexon damaged by this game being created in the identical manner by the people who shouldn't have been able to create it in this identical way. Yes, of course it is. I don't think anyone can argue otherwise. Does this suck for gamers? In a way. If this gets to the point where Nexon wins, and of course, I'm not saying that if Nexon wins, that means Dark and Darker never comes out, because that's not guaranteed to happen. There's a million ways this can go, and I'll try and explain a couple. But in another way, it doesn't suck for gamers, because realistically, would big companies, would we be better in the industry without big companies? Probably not on the overall, right? I think they have pros and cons. They make a lot of like high production value games. They make games that a majority of people play, and they pump a lot of money into the industry, and some of them write games, for instance, put a bunch of money into indie developers. Nexon were essentially trying to do this with this game and some others at the time. I think obviously there's a point to be made about like, oh, you know, fuck big corporations and indie games for the win, and I love indie games and they're the ones I predominantly play. But at the same time, if you just allowed this to happen, they wouldn't be making games like this anymore. Like, it would inevitably harm the industry if they just said, yeah, you're allowed to do this, you're allowed to take the files, you're allowed to do all these things, if provable, again, they're allegations, and essentially rip off a game that had been paid for in whole, essentially by another company. It would be an untenable manner for the industry to operate in. So is it bad for this individual game? Yeah, if you wanted this game to come out. But again, I will just say, even if Nexon win, they could just order that they change the game and that this damage is paid. They could settle out of court, they could settle with Nexon becoming like a publisher or something for the game. There's a million ways this can go. They could win on all these things and get paid, and the game doesn't have to change at all. There's so many things that can happen. Just because Nexon says, I want X, Y, and Z because this happened, doesn't mean that's what's going to be awarded to them, even if they win. Shit like this takes literally years, guys. This will take years. Now, what's going to happen in the interim? It's really hard to say, because we have some precedent from similar companies having things like this happen. Myth of Empires is a good example, where they were blocked from releasing on Steam, and they eventually started selling the game on their own website. Now, I'm not familiar enough with that case to know whether or not there was an injunction filed,
Myth of Empires?
Or not, of having the company essentially not be able to operate service or sell the product. So could IronMace do that? Potentially, I don't know. Could they continue to proliferate the game basically and have people play via a torrent? Potentially, I don't know. Because this was filed on the 14th of April, so it's like 2 days ago. It's basically right as the playtest was starting. I personally don't think it was a good idea for them to release a torrent of the game and start operating the game with.
Wait, 14th of April? Wait, this shit is 2 days old. Oh. Wait, what was everyone else reacting to then?
They knew this was happening. They literally knew this.
This shit is new.
I don't think that's going to help them. But at the same time, I don't know what I do in their position. I don't know what lawyer advice they've got. There's so many moving parts.
The DMCA.
It's really impossible for anyone to say unless you're...
Right, they were all responding just to the DMCA and just to the language in that, and already immediately jumping to conclusions because they saw the game and they thought it looked cool. Right, okay.
Lawyer specifically familiar with the case on both sides, and also, of course, the specific laws that this is pertaining to in Washington specifically. So there's a million ways this can go, but there's no doubt in my mind that this is going to be incredibly interesting to follow, because this sets a precedent moving forward for the games industry, and is also by two big companies. People love IronMace, people love Dark and Darker, people fucking hate Nexon. So it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah,
I'll
fuck
definitely be following
Nexon.
up with all the coverage, as I have been doing, and trying to at least, you know, give you the, in my opinion, what is the most logical, consistent approach to the information that we've got so far, which I know is not the popular thing I should be saying. Lol, look at this document, Nexon so dumb, but just not going to do it, am I? There we go. Thanks for watching. See you next time, peace.
Okay, so they were responding to different things, right? That's why let's just say that the opinion and the insight and the biases of the two people is so different, because the one they're responding to different files. Hopefully, I'd like that he addressed at least some of those other things as well. It's funny to me how, I don't know, I thought a bunch of this stuff might be a little bit weird for me and like I wouldn't really know, but some of the examples I came up with were things that were actually mentioned in the thing as well, or that he mentioned as well, and it seems like he's at least read up a little bit more on it, so I don't feel too bad about my my opinions and my reactions. But yeah, as a recap, I guess looks pretty sus. Yeah, it'll probably take a while before they get through all of that, because for every single example, everything you've got in there, I imagine that Nexon has a bunch of proof. The timeline is, I guess the timeline is going to be pretty important, but how do you prove that because like one of the accusations is they knew that he was planning on like leaving the company, and then he got blackballed as soon as that happened. How are you gonna, if someone says like, oh, we didn't know yet, and then someone else says, no, you did know, God, that's got to be so hard to prove that people already knew if they say they don't, or the other way around. That's got to be horrible. The like deleting the evidence off, I don't know who that guy's lawyer is, but if they say like, hey, we want to make sure you check your hard drive to make sure that you stole our shit, and he's like, oh yeah, you can look at it, and it's like, psych, I actually deleted all of it, but I did it out of the goodness of my heart to make sure that I definitely didn't have any of your files. Like, people know about, like, if you own a computer, you know about like USBs and shit, and how you can make copies of stuff, and if you delete like the original thing like over and over and you scrub that shit, now you still have the file, it's just in another location. Like, you understand this, right? Yeah, that stuff just does not track at all. If you know you're under investigation, you know that whole thing is already hanging over your head, and then you decide that as a move, even if for some weird ass reason it was actually not a bad thing, I feel like you hang on that already. So I feel pretty confident to say that Choi guy is at least going to be convicted of something. That that almost seems inevitable. And if he somehow gets away with everything, then Nexon's lawyers are the actual clowns, because holy shit. If you have all of these things like lined up, you've got to have some proof of all of that shit that you should be able to prove in a court, I guess, or during discovery, like throwing everything out there. That would be insanely wild if they couldn't substantiate anything, or if there was like adequate proof against all of this. That would be wild. But possible, but highly unlikely. But yeah, if you think I think the positive thing is, if you really liked Dark&Darker as a project and you really wanted to play it, just wait until P3 from Nexon comes out, and you'll enjoy that as well, because apparently it's the same game. All right, make sure you sign up for the pre-launch, for the pre-release when that game comes out, and because that's the wildest thing. Because now people are going to hate Nexon, but you like Nexon games because you like Dark&Darker, and Dark&Darker is a copy of a Nexon game. So this is like the perfect. It's like the perfect situation, because people can still hate on Nexon for how they did it, but they can also secretly still like and play the Nexon game. It's like a win-win, dude. Genius. Same game with loot boxes. Yeah, that's the last part. Like, where was the monetization? I want to see that. How are they going to do the loot boxes? Because without that, it's not really a Nexon game, right? Maybe it was those chests that they were like rubbing their hands over. But yeah, okay. So apparently this is much newer. I didn't know how old this was. I probably should have checked the date before I checked the video. But this stuff is apparently 2 days old. So wow, fresh. Well, actually 1 day old, because it's past midnight here. So this was uploaded on the file was uploaded on the 14th. This video is from the 16th, and this is 17/18th on my reaction. My big official first. Well, it's my big official first react. Not really, but cool. But yeah, now that we have this extra information and this what is it called? It's just a plaintiff case number. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Again, I don't have I don't care about Dark&Darker. I don't care about P3. I don't really care about Nexon. I mean, if it goes under, I'll find another game. I don't really have a dog in this fight, but it's looking kind of bad. And it doesn't help that the people who are like running defense super hard for Dark&Darker are just saying some wild shit that is just, again, my brain still hurts from the whole. It's so noble to delete all your files to make sure that they could investigate whether or not he actually stole anything. Your mouth should, like, like in the Matrix, where it's like that should happen whenever you say something, and then after, it should be like a week until you can speak again. And you just think about what you've done with like one of those little cone hats, the way you stand in the corner of the room. Because, yeah. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys think. I'm still talking 1.5x speed as well, sorry. And see you on the next one, I guess. I don't know. Oh yeah, and there's a little bit cut off in the beginning because I was late with audio. But, you know, whatever. Peace.